hitting for Naki this evening. This is Koviki Talk, a multi-episode series where we talk about all things COVID-19, but from the Pacific Islander perspective. So we have Pacific Islanders leading conversations about how the pandemic has affected us. We're timely with it. So when it was time to register for the census, we talked about how do we do that safely as Pacific Islanders. When it was time to vote, we talked about voting in a pandemic, getting to the polls safely, doing it virtual or mailing taking advantage of the mail-in votes, all those kind of things. Right now, it's the vaccine. There's a lot of talk about the vaccine, and really, what we wanted to do is start talking about, life. How are we holding up, and how are we practicing self-care, and kind of take a break from the vaccine for a second, and just talk about people that are holding down jobs and getting through the pandemic. So that's the topic today. With us today, we have Dacia Afrotene. Um, let's see here. We have a nice. Naki wrote some nice words about Dacia.
Oh,
Dacia
really?
Taleni is a creator and host of a podcast called The Real Tautala, which provides both comical and serious critique of popular culture in the U.S. and the South Pacific from a Black and Samoan perspective. Speaker, content creator, educator, and overall vivacious character. She does not shy away from addressing the issue of color, which stems from anti-blackness in Pacifica, and engaging in conversation on topics which are often labeled taboo. Welcome, Dacia. Thank you for sitting in on short notice.
Thank you for having me.
And Dacia's going to introduce our guest. It's always nice to close out a Monday evening after a long day of a Monday and talk to innovative, inspiring people. And today we've got somebody special that I've watched, and I actually emceed a show where she was on a panel, and I came away from there just blown away with the breadth of knowledge that our guest has. So I'll turn it over to Dacia.
Talo for everyone and welcome to Koviki Talk. Here we have today is Dr. Fuifuilupe Niumeitolu, and she is a Tongan Oceanian scholar, storyteller, and community organizer. Her research and community work center issues of climate and environmental justice, ending violence against women, prison abolition and restorative justice, and building radical solidarities with California American Indian tribes to protect indigenous sacred sites in the Pacific, Oceania, and here in California. So she's graduated with her PhD from the University of California, Berkeley in 2019. Currently, she is a University of California President's postdoctoral fellow and facilitator of the Oceania Research Working Group in the Department of Native American Studies of Universities of California, Davis. Fui is a part of the is it Sorenga de Land Trust, an
Mhm.
urban indigenous women-led organization that rematriates the indigenous lands back to the indigenous peoples, and she hosts the popular Sorenga Te Seeding Hope Seeker series.
Wow.
Welcome, Fui. So Naki's not here, but she's here in spirit. She's in charge of our icebreaker question on Koviki Talk. So although she's not here to ask it, she did leave that for us, and I think Dacia and I'll go first since you haven't had as much time to think about it. And the question is, or statement is, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from. I'm sorry, that is not it. The question is, the icebreaker is, what book or movie have you read or seen recently you would recommend and why? And I think I'll let Dacia go first, give Fui a second to think about it, and then I'll go second, and then we'll have Fui close that out.
Hi. So recently I've been reading a book called Inner Engineering, A Yogi's Guide to Joy, and it's written by a man called Sadhguru. It looks like this. I just have it on hand because it's just a really good book and I've been in it. And it just gives a common sense way to guide you through your spirituality and what you're doing currently. If you're like me and like most Pacifica people, you've been in Christianity or some kind of religion that you grew up in or were you raised in, and a lot of our guide towards life is like the ultimate goal of going to heaven and things like that. But for Sadhguru, he tries to center someone's perspective of, the ultimate goal of life is to live life. Life is already amazing. Why do we have to kind of wait to get to heaven to appreciate what it is that we're experiencing now? So kind of gives honor to waking up every morning and experiencing nature, and kind of not trying to have us think that our jobs is our life, but it's our jobs are just the accessories to our life, and that life is actually how we breathe and how our minds and all those things. So it's helped me during this pandemic to kind of not freak out and try to appreciate waking up every morning and seeing the sun and being able to walk, mobility, all of these things that we kind of take for granted. It He helps you focus on those things, and kind of put in perspective that what I might be freaking out about or having anxiety about is basically a shift in perspective, and we just need to center that. So Sadhguru's Inner Engineering, A Yogi's Guide to Joy would be a strong recommend for me if you're ever wanting to read a book. And it's very easy to read. It's not too academic in a way where you wouldn't be able to get it. It's very approachable.
So I'm interested in books like that, with that concept at this point. You know what I mean? But I wasn't interested in that. You know, I don't know how many years ago, but there's a point where I would have, somebody would have said what you were saying and probably got two sentences in, and I would have tuned it out. You know what I mean? There's a point in my life where I wouldn't be ready for that. Have you always been interested in these kind of books, or have you developed into those kind of books?
I'm mostly a writer than a reader, but I got introduced to Sadhguru when I was watching his YouTubes. He just made
Ah,
so much logical sense, and even though he's an elderly man, probably in his 60s or 70s, he goes and speaks to the youth, and he speaks to them in a way that is so approachable and non-judgmental at all. He has no judgment, so he sits in a room full of college students and lets them fire off questions, and he answers them from a mystic, perspective. Of course, he's still a guru, a spiritual guru, but he is so approachable, and it makes sense. It's like trying to understand your body and your brain in a very logical, linear way, and not in this above in the clouds complex spiritual way where it just enticed me to want to get to know him more. So YouTube and his podcast really led me to the book, and because I found value in his words by hearing them, I found value in his words by reading it.
wow. And you're turning pages. I'm reading, well, I'm not I'm getting through books, but I'm doing it through audiobooks. So good for you for still turning pages. I'm too lazy for that, I think. So the book that I'm reading I'm reading actually for the second time because I found it that interesting. It's probably the second time in a year and a half. It's called Sea Peoples by Christina Coleman, and it talks about the where do Polynesians come from, and it's really interesting because it goes through the first discovery, as we call it, or they call it, of Polynesians, and then it talks about how where the original theory was where Polynesians came from, and it talks about that from like the 15th and 1600s, and then it goes through like Captain Cook's arrival into Polynesia and his initial thoughts. And this is what's interesting to me is his initial thoughts were, wow, these are amazing navigators, they're seafarers. And it was kind of accepted, you know what I mean? But then that was rewritten later, and it talks about how history changes because of the way that really Europeans were the ones that are documenting it, at least in the scholar quote world. And it talks about how there was a time where the distant lands and exotic people were really what Europe was writing about. So like Robinson Crusoe and all those things. So then that was really that's how they wrote our history. They wrote Polynesian history from that standpoint, and then it became more of a scholarly concept, and they started to retract some of the things that were technological advances and those kind of things started to be unwritten from history. But so it goes through from the Dutch first getting into the Pacific all the way to today, and then it gets into like just the different ways that everything everybody has said where we come from, and to see how the history was written and go through from that perspective is really fascinating to me. There's a piece in the book where it talks about Captain Cook leaving Tahiti, and him. There was a Tahitian on board, and Tupaya knew where islands were, and Christina Coleman is like, and it's maddening to read the journals and be screaming out, why didn't anybody ask how he knew where the islands were? You know what I mean? So like there could have been so much more information gathered from Tupaya on Captain Cook's ship. So there's just a ton of history in there, and talk about where we came from and the navigation of the stories, how it all changes over all these different years, and it goes through like carbon dating and landscape archaeological digs and unwriting history and then rewriting it. So I'm a bit of a history geek, so I'm reading that book for the second time around, and it's fascinating to me. Again, that's Christina Coleman, Sea Peoples, and if you are interested about where Polynesians came from, at least how history's been written over the centuries that they've known we're here, it's a good trip down the historical road. So I will turn that over to Fui. What book or movie have you read or seen recently you would recommend, and why?
Wow, wow. See, malo e taulava. Malo e ngauipa, malo e puka whanua to our niece, Efrotene, and to you, Brother Carl. It really is. It's a great honor to be here and to be here also with all our relatives who are joining us. I see big shout out to our niece over there, Tupo Latu Kefu. Go Cal Bears. Go Cal Bears. Yeah, but also to Naki as well, and to our niece Leah for organizing, for inviting me here to this Talanoa space. And I really, with great humility as well, I really want to acknowledge that I'm zooming in from Oakland, California, home of the Black Panther Party, and also, the indigenous stewards of this land are the Lishanaloni. And so with great humility. Relatives, I'm listening to you, Deja, and to Brother Carl. You guys are so great. Like, you guys are reading books. I mean, I have to be quite honest, and I really want to be honest with this one. What I've been watching that I absolutely love is actually watching the Wu-Tang Clan show on Netflix. Right, because I have so much respect for those brothers.
Mm-hmm.
So watching this Netflix show on the Wu-Tang Clan, because I love Method Man. So just watching the show of how the group originated, it's just watching these young Black men grow up in America with experiences that so many of us as Pacific peoples also experience, right? With discrimination, growing up with poverty. And also using their Black traditions like jazz, right? Using all the many forms of Black music to form this beautiful Black tradition of rap music, right? And so I absolutely love it. So I have to be honest. For me, that is the show that I'm watching right now. I'm also revisiting, all the old Wu-Tang Clan songs. Absolutely, that's what's keeping me alive right now. So, but I love Appertain. I wish I was as good as you to read a good spiritual book right now. I love that recommendation, and also Brother Carl, I love it. Love hearing also the work that you're reading is about our people and especially about our origins. And so I'm really excited to be learning from both of you.
Thank you. Well, when we have a doctor congratulating us on reading, I'm going to take
Right.
that as a compliment. Run with that every day of the week. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where you're from, where you went to school. It's the PIs are, they want to know the name, they want to know where they grew up, they want to know, all those things. So let's kind of walk through that. Where you from, where you went to school, and where you living now.
Sure. I also forgot to say thank you so much to our sister Naki for all the great work that you do. And although you're not here, we still miss you and your spirit's here with us. So, relatives, I have had a long journey in academia. And I really like to talk about it because there's also a lot of shame. I mean, I talk about for my own self there's also a lot of shame because being in academia, you're supposed to be only in it for a few years, right? They tell you that your undergraduate is supposed to be 4 years. If you're going to do a master's, tops 2 years, right? And then a PhD, for the most part, 5 years. And so, relatives, I want to say that I did it in an Oceania kind of way, maybe. Maybe it's a way that's very, very different to the Western standards of time. So I did my PhD in 13 years. That didn't include doing the master's and of course the undergraduate with that. But I say it and I talk about it because, as I just mentioned, it brings a lot of shame, and I'm working through it. But I also I talk about it because in so many of the conversations with our young people, and even our not so young people, right, who are going back to school or who are thinking about going back to school, I hope that you know that there isn't a time frame, right? That the time frame that's set up for us, perhaps a time frame that the West sets up for us, that we don't, that if we can't follow it, that's also okay. And that's really important for me because through the work that I do, the research that I do is on violence against women. And it was a work, relatives. It was a research that that had to do that research for me required that I had to do a lot of work on my own life, right? And so I'm really grateful for so many people. When I talk about how I got through higher education, I am actually talking about many people. So although you see me here on my own, I really, there's so many people, there are thousands and thousands. Firstly, my ancestors. I really want to thank my ancestors for never giving up on me. And I want to also thank so many relatives. They're not blood related to me, but who lived here in the Bay Area, who really supported me, who it meant so much to them to support me so that I could do the work that I do. I just want to talk too about the importance of us as Pacifica women coming together to support each other. How I finished the dissertation was because I had some Native Hawaiian sisters. My good sister who was also on my dissertation committee, Professor Maile Arvin. She actually was the one who first reached out because she saw that I was in pain. She saw that I was suffering, and then I couldn't finish the dissertation. And just in a very compassionate way, she said, "Hey, come to our writing group." And when I went to the writing group, I also met, another good sister who's just one of my biggest supporters throughout my time in academia and even outside, is my good sister, Native Hawaiian sister too, Lani Tavis, Professor Lani Tavis, who's the chair of the Gender and Women's Studies Department at the University of Hawaii in Manoa. And then also, Sister Kehaulani Natsuko, who's now a professor too at the University of the University of Utah, teaching Pacific Island Studies. For me, I just really want to humbly say thank you to these sisters. We're not related by blood, but these sisters recognized, they saw me, and they saw me as a sister, and they brought me into their circle. And not only did they help me to finish writing, they gave me all the encouragement. They shared their networks, their social networks with me. And they even in this process now of, in the job market and all of that, it's the sisters again. And I want to thank them for their great love for me and helping me to be here.
That's wonderful. Just hearing how your friends kind of rallied around you and try to keep you on track. I'm so happy that you mentioned that education doesn't have an age. When you said that, I resonated with that because it's true. When you go into school, we go into school thinking I'm supposed to get this done in 4 years. I'm supposed to get my master's in 2 years. And once you pass a certain age, and I see a bunch of people, once you pass a certain age, they say, "Oh, I can't go back to school. What do I look like going back to school?" But for you to be a testament of education is a lifelong process. We're lifelong learners. To to see you be so proud to mention that supposed shame. I appreciate that very much, because a lot of folks watching right now, maybe they are considering, I could be that professor, I could be that teacher if I could just go back to school. And you are a wonderful example of what it means to persevere and to stay in higher education. Um, given given what you've said about your shame, what was your experience as a Pacific Islander in higher education obtaining your PhD?
Thank you so much for the great question. You know, when we ask, for me too, when I acknowledge, and I just really want to honor, you know, for me, the relatives who helped me to be on the journey that I'm on today. I also just really want to say a big thank you and so much love and respect to Professor Vika Palaita, my Samoan brother, who, you know, who we both graduated from the same ethnic studies department at UC Berkeley. And he's also, you know, doing such a great job mentoring and also teaching our young people and our communities at City College of San Francisco, Critical Oceania Studies. And also my, you know, my half a day as well to my Chamorro brother, Mikey Tuncap. Right, it was, you know, from Guam. It was really these two brothers. When I had finished doing my master's at Purdue, the first job that I had, Carl and Deja, was actually, it was a great blessing, was to teach Pacific Island Studies at City College of San Francisco. You know, and to even say that is to also acknowledge the genealogy, right? The genealogy of the young warriors who actually fought for Pacific Island Studies at City College of San Francisco. This was many, many years ago, right? This was actually, I have to really give a big shout out to the Samoan churches, the Samoan congregational churches throughout San Francisco, because these were the churches that were behind the movement for Pacific Island Studies. Also, it was the young Samoan warriors, the young students who really fought for Pacific Island Studies. You know, I remember just a newly finished graduate student who came, and I sat in the classes, right? I sat in the classes, and I remember hearing the students fighting and saying, "We want Pacific Island Studies. We're fighting for our self-determination. We're fighting for our families and our communities." Right, and I think for me that really politicized me when I first came to California. And I just really want to thank those young people. I mean, I remember they were 17 years old, 18 years old. Many of them were going to Balboa High School, right? And I thought to myself, wow, what an important way to learn, right? I was much older than them. And here are these young students, and they also came with their parents and grandparents. And I saw pastors doing the testimonies in front of City College, saying that we are here to let you know how important Pacific Island Studies is. I heard people for the first time in my life saying, I am proud to be Samoan, right? And that meant everything to me. Because, you know, relatives, I grew up in Utah, right? It's a very different political climate. So when I came here and I saw these young people and intergenerational, right, stand up and say, I am proud to be Samoan. Then I want to give a big shout out to the Hawaiian Culture Center of San Francisco, because Kumu Kavika Alfiche was also a big part of it as well. Him and all his hula halal, right? Also, Kumu Patrick Makunekane was also a big part of it. So I really just want to say a big aloha to all of them, and to hear those young, you know, those brothers at that time stand up and talk about Pacific Island Studies is important because we believe in Hawaiian self-determination. We believe in Hawaiian sovereignty. You know, relatives, that for me as a Tongan woman at that time, all this talk from our people, this, you know, what we call, maybe in some parts of our community, we might call radical talk. But for me, that talk was actually these people, these young people, these elders speaking not only for themselves, but their voices represented the voices of our ancestors. And I think for me that just changed my life. Niece, that changed my life. And I remember in our conversation with my good brothers Vika and Mikey, they said when you come to UC Berkeley, you're going to be invisible.
Mm.
They're not going to know who you are. And when they look at you, they're going to look at you like they look at us. They're going to think that you're here only because you're an athlete. I mean, I don't know anybody's thinking I'm an athlete. Maybe them, right? But right. I remember Mika said that. I said, brother, you know what? I don't know about me, but maybe you guys, but not me. But anyways, well, of course, I took their advice. I took their advice, and these brothers really worked hard. Really worked hard. They said, "Don't be afraid. We're here to go through the whole process with you." And Tana, they were, and also Brother Carl, these brothers were there, and they were there all those years throughout at Cal. Right, and also I want to give a big shout out as well to some of the young leaders at Cal at that time was Tavai Samuelu, who's now the director of Epic. Right, at that time when we were at Cal, she was just a young warrior, and look at you now, Tavai. All of us together, we worked through our invisibility, our systemic invisibility in academia. But we came together, and what we did is we created a family. And that family is still strong today. I have to say that the opportunities I have are completely from the many, many people who took me under their wing and who cared for me. And I want to say thank you to all the young people, so many wonderful young scholars and young leaders who made sure that I had food. I remember that, so I have to bring that story up. There was many times, right? There was many times I would get a bagel from someone, right? And this is the undergraduates at Cal. And also just the jokes, man. We would sit and just clown on people. That was the best. We would stand at Sproul. This is the main entrance into UC Berkeley, and just clown on people. And you can be depressed, but I'm telling you though, once you do that clowning with everybody, you're with family, and everything's gonna be okay. So yeah, Tina, to answer your question, it was really difficult, right? It was really difficult. But what was just so beautiful about the whole process was the community. We created such an important and such a beautiful community. And in fact, it was also the activist work that we all did together as a group, right? That also created the Pacific Islander initiative that is currently there right now. And so that is one of the humble contributions that we worked to create. And what is just beautiful about that is that also, our young nieces and nephews are coming after us are also, that's an institutional resource that's there to help support them.
Awesome. I love the way that you talk about your sisters and the help and the bond that you have. Can maybe the both of you could talk about being a PI woman in the pandemic? And I know that there are, you had said it before, Fui, about, they're not blood, but they're family. You know what I mean? But so the close knit sisterhood in the PI, from a PI woman's perspective, did COVID, as you go through the pandemic, did COVID enhance that and make things stronger? Did it strain the relationships? Talk about being a Pacific Islander woman going through the pandemic, and did it strengthen the relationships or affect it at all? Dacia, I'll throw it out to you, and then obviously Fui, I want to hear from you too.
I think for the pandemic, in a sense, it highlighted how much we stress our Pacific Islander women out. I feel that you kind of are the support beam in the household. When everything else is falling around, they look to you to take care of your elders. They look to you to provide some kind of financial support. They look to you to kind of watch out if you're the oldest, they to watch over others. And so the question that arose for me in the pandemic is who watches after the eldest? Who watches after the women who are constantly the support beam? Who is the support for the support beam in the house? And so I've spent a lot of time kind of trying to negotiate between my self-care and the care of my family. Sometimes that means in order to find your way throughout the pandemic, you kind of have to separate a little bit and center yourself so you can be able to be a better person and a better um, active member within your family. So that's highlighted a lot for me. I've reached out to other Pacific Islander women who are my tribe, and just knowing that we have a collective story, a collective narrative that we're all trying to read and rewrite makes me feel better, because the worst thing you can ever feel in this pandemic is alone. Is my story the only story? Where are the other pages to this chapter? And so I'm grateful that I do get to find beautiful versions of this story in either my Hawaiian brothers and sisters, my Fijian brothers and sisters, just to know that that story is being told and being rewritten, because we don't want to keep feeling this way. We want to recognize that we are not just the storytellers, but we are the story writers. Like, we are the authors of these stories. Just because we have a story passed down to us doesn't mean we're not given the right to rewrite them. So that's what's been highlighted for me during COVID. Just my power as an author, my power as someone to take my agency and separate myself and recenter myself, and also connect with my sisters and kind of talk about our narratives. What is the role of the Pacific Islander woman in the family and in the world, and how can we evolve that as we go on?
Powerful words, Dacia. Thank you. Fui, how about you? How has that affected your sisterhood? I love the way that Dacia put that.
Yeah, Deja, I really appreciate that. That's so important. Everything you just said, I'm right there. I'm right there. I definitely agree with you. I think what the pandemic did, as you talked about so eloquently, is that it really laid bare many of the institutional perhaps suffering, right, and violence that was there in the first place. But what it did is it just really brought it out to the surface. And I think what you're talking about is specifically just a disproportionate parts that women, especially women of color, and because our community suffered so much. I mean, I just, to our wonderful community that's showing up, I just really wanna share, the importance of how this moment of the COVID really changed our community and the great suffering that we're carrying. And as many of you know, right, from all the experiences, from your lived experiences of people who you loved who passed away in your families and in our communities. And as you all know too, Carl and Deja, that our communities were our Pacifica communities here in the United States were 3 times actually suffered COVID death rates and also infection rates 3 times higher than the national average, right? 3 times higher than a national average, meaning that COVID death rates was 182 per 100,000 people, which is the highest, right? And I just want to say, which is the highest of other racial and of any racial and ethnic groups here in the United States. So what we're talking about, relatives, is just immeasurable loss, irreparable loss. And how do we even begin to talk about it? And then you put on top of that too, Pacifica women who are already marginalized, right? Who are already marginalized. For so many of us are marginalized under the AAPI, a racial classification. I also want to bring into this conversation our young Pacific Islander relatives who are gender non-binary. because what we also saw during the COVID pandemic was the high rise of trans violence of our Pacific Islander relatives. That didn't just happen out in the rest of the world, but that also this violence happened within our own families and within our own communities. And these were young people, these were young people that many of us also knew that helped to raise, who are an important part of our communities, who, for their experiences during the pandemic and during the times of great crisis in our communities, that many of our aggression as a community were put on the bodies of women, young girls, and the bodies also of our trans or gender or LGBTQ relatives. So yes, so I want to talk about, perhaps I just want to acknowledge, right? I know we don't have the time, but I just want to acknowledge, I just want to humbly acknowledge and honor the many forms of violence, of gender violence that happened in our families and our communities, and also the great losses of the deaths and the suffering that happened in our families and our communities here in the United States, and also our families and our communities in the Pacific. Right, in the Pacific, because as we're hearing too, that the COVID rates are increasing now in our many island homelands. So relatives, I just really I wanna acknowledge that.
Thank you for that. I think the piece of it that things just get accentuated and intensified. So the role of the Pacifica woman being the caretaker gets intensified because of the pandemic, and health conditions, comorbidities become intensified because of it. So there was all the challenges and things we go through as a people just got put under a magnifying glass, and when it was already worse, it got exponentially worse. Real quick, you're listening to and watching Koviki Talk, and we are with our new co-host, Dacia Afro-Taney from the Real Tautala, and Dr. Fuifuilupe. I know that we wanted to share a website and talk a little bit about that. So maybe you can kind of set that up and talk about the website and where people can get to it. And I think that we're going to show an actual shot of the website.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Carl. Well, I just wanted to, because one of the issues that we were going to be talking about tonight, and that we are talking about tonight, is that we're just talking about, some of the changes or what some of our responses to COVID in our communities. And, I guess I just wanted to share this particular website. And it was a story that was written by our Samoan sister from New Zealand, who's in Aotearoa, Penina. Where did I put Penina's name right now? Okay, it's going to come up. Oh, Penina Momoisea, right? And so really, I just wanted to show how so many people in our community came together. Right, if you are able to take a look at that website, but it also showed not just a collaboration between Pacific Islanders here in California, but we reached out. We did this poetry event in December last year, right? And you guys, it was our response to the young people coming to us talking about depression. And especially, we really wanted to honor the stories of the young trans and queer Pacific Islander kids who came to us because they felt invisible in our families and communities. Right, so when we got together, right, this is also our good sister Lee Gawa, who's a professor of Pacific Island Studies here at San Francisco State University. And these were so many different people who just came together. Please forgive me if I don't mention your name right now. I'm not that smart sometimes and I can't remember all the names, but please know that your work was so important, right? And so these were collaborations here in California and with our relatives in Samoa, right? Our relatives also in New Zealand and also in Australia. And when we got together, we said, why don't we do a poetry event, right? Because the role of poetry is first and foremost, it is a Pacific Islander cultural. It is one of our most important cultural, traditions, right? Poetry. And I remember in our conversation, we just dreamt, right? We did radical dreaming. And one of the things that we said is, why don't we ask the honorable and the well-renowned Honorable Albert Wendt if he could be if he could be one of the speakers or one of the main poets at this event. And Carl and Tene, when we said that, we're like, yeah, it's not going to happen, right? It's not going to happen. I mean, hello, how is that going to happen? And in what logical ways is this, big poet? And we have no money too, by the way. Okay, let me throw that in the mix. We're all poor, right? We're all poor. You know what, our relatives? I guess why I wanted to show that story is because I wanted to show the importance of our faith. Right, at this time when we really wanted to honor and to show the young people something beautiful, something that could bring a lot of hope by using our own cultural traditions, right? We didn't want to leave outside of our community to find that hope. And you guys, we don't know how, we do know how it happened, but I guess it doesn't make a lot of logical sense in the Western way. But in our Oceania way, it makes all the sense. When honorable, and I really want to say that, Honorable Albert Wendt, when he heard about this project, he said yes. And more than he just said yes, that he was going to participate, we had no money to pay him. And he said yes. And I also want to honor, if you look at the website too, all the prominent Pacific Islander poets from all around the world who came to speak. We have Kathy Gentil Kitchener there, who as well, the renowned climate justice poet and activist from the Marshall Islands. Also, we had our good brother and also our Cal UC Berkeley alumni, Craig Santos Perez, who said yes. Right, we have the renowned poet, Native Hawaiian poet, No'u Rivera, who just recently won the National Poetry Award, right? The big award for here in the United States, right? First Native Hawaiian woman who's queer to win that award. So relatives, what I'm trying to say is everybody came. Everybody came, they put their time in, and people who are usually paid thousands and thousands of dollars, who you have to book many months in advance, and usually we have to go through their assistants. You guys, we asked him, we said, Uncle, can you come and read? Uncle, our children are dying. And he said yes. And every single person that we asked, from the Bay Area as well, our good sister Teresa Singatonu, right? And so many people. We had young people who were all assistants. Young people spent their Saturdays and Sundays getting ready for this project, right? And we really want to give a big shout out to Kim Shock, who is first Indigenous Poet Laureate of San Francisco, right? She's Indigenous American Indian. And it was her, everyone, I want to say it was her who gave us this opportunity. And she was the one who said, I know that your community is suffering. I know that your community is suffering. Let us give you a space to create something to help bring, the medicine to your community. So really, we also want to acknowledge so many of the Indigenous people here in California who really stood behind us, who made sure that this project worked, that this project came to fruition. So
I think it's so important that marginalized communities stand shoulder to shoulder. And,
Yes.
like our Native American brothers and sisters and our Hispanic brothers and sisters, and all the, the different marginalized groups need to stand together, because when you have things like, our Black brothers and sisters move forward through the Civil Rights Act, they're really the ones that were pushing that. On their backs came every other minority that benefited from, their efforts. So standing shoulder to shoulder with our brothers and sisters is always powerful. It is amazing to see. We are not able to share the screenshot of the website, but we did put it into the chat. So you can definitely check the chat on the live and go check that amazing website out. There's the link. And I know that we are sharing very precious minutes with our doctor today. So I'm going to turn it over to Dacia and let her ask our last question, and then let the two of you go about the rest of your Monday evening.
So, well, for the last question, hmm,
There's so many. There's so many.
there's
That
so
just means
many
we got to have a second show. We got to have
There's
you
so many
back.
questions because we know that you're an active member in the community, and I just want to make sure that you let us know what your current projects are, and if you need anyone to be involved, how are the ways that we all over. Whether it be globally or just in California or nationally in the US, how can we be involved or how can we support you in the beautiful work that you're doing?
Deja, that's a really great question. Perhaps every time, relatives, I really apologize because I feel like even if I were to talk about a next project, I really have to talk about the wonderful young people who are organizing it as well. ABL, who was a Samoan a scientist, actually doing his undergraduate at UC Davis, and also Henrietta, who's a Tongan niece at UC Davis, who's finishing. But these are two wonderful young people, and we're working together to create the Oceania Research Working Set group for next year. Right, so we hope that also, and part of that group is that we're going to be creating a speaker series, right? And so we really look forward, Tene, your important work, especially bringing the important connections between our communities, our Pacifica communities with our African American brothers and sisters is so important to us. And so we definitely hope that we can work together. And also, Carl, your important work too, with your health journey that we were just talking about when we first started this conversation. We hope too that this kind of information you can share with our young people in this research working group that we're going to be doing next year. So, relatives, I hope that when you see our flyers, right, and they of course, ABL and Henrietta are going to be creating those flyers. I hope that you might find some time to come in and check out the program. Our first program that the young people, by the way, organized, we had our commissioner. Right, we had our commissioner, Molinga, our Samoan commissioner here in San Francisco. He came and he spoke to the young people. He talked about the importance of service, right? And everybody loved it, right? Everybody loved it. We had our young brothers there who are part of the football team. They were just so moved, right? And we also had our young Fijian brothers, young nieces and nephews from Fiji, also from Guam. I'm just thinking about where the Pacific, also and Palau as well, right? So that's definitely a project that I'm looking forward to with the young people for next year.
Thank you so much. Like I said, I know that we are pressed for time, and I wanted to make sure that we respect that and honor that. Any last shout outs? And I know that basically this means that Naki and I need to set up another show because we have like 20 other questions, important questions that we want to do, and we want to get your opinion and hear your voice on. So we just have to do this again. Any shout outs? Anything that you want to get out before we go?
Brother Carl, I want to give a big shout out to our beloved relatives. I know as Pacific people, we carry so much, right? All of us, our Pacific Islander brothers. Big shout out to our brothers too. So many of our Pacific Islander brothers who are behind bars right now, and our sisters. I want you to know that you're not forgotten and that we keep you in our prayers. And to all our relatives who made it out today, hey, we see you. We see you, and thank you so much for your struggle, and thank you so much for your faith.
Thank you, Fui. Dacia?
Shout out to everyone and anyone out there who's watching and tuning in. And please, if you ever have the time, if you have time to TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, you have time to go check out Dr. Fuifuilupe, and also check her out on YouTube. There's wonderful talks that she has recorded on there too. And anytime you see her have a project, please take some interest, share it. If you know anybody who might be interested, spread the word. The best thing that is also good and bad about our culture is that good and bad news travels fast. So let's make good news travel faster than bad news, okay?
So true, so true. The good news is news travels fast. The bad news is bad news travels fast.
True.
Um, so thank you for joining us here on Koviki Talk with what we'll call part one with Fui, and we'll have our second part very soon. Our next show, our next Koviki Talk episode will be at 5 p.m. on Monday, December 13th. So there's going to be a few weeks between now and our next show. Look for guest information, all of Pacifica by Design social media channels. Thank you, Fui, so much for the precious, blessed minutes with you. And thank you, Dacia, for co-hosting with me tonight on short notice. We appreciate that. Check out the Real Tal Tala on SoundCloud and social media. Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.